We got something pretty special here today with the Sony X95L in 85 inches. This is the highest tier mini LED LCD from Sony in 2023. Now, I did not get to review this in my typical setting. This is done at the Value Electronics showroom, so it is quite bright and there are reflections in the image that you're seeing. However, I did get to spend many hours with it, and I did bring my equipment, my own content, and got to fully evaluate it. And overall, I was very impressed with it being an LCD based model, and I have to say this is the best LCD model that I've ever tested, seen, and in my opinion the best LCD ever made. So while it's no OLED, so there is some very minor haloing and blooming, it is the least amount that I've seen on any Sony to date. It retains plenty of brightness and color accuracy, and is what you would expect from Sony in pretty much every other regard. Typically with local dimming displays, you're either going to lose a lot of brightness as it's trying to suppress the brightness to have less blooming, or it'll go the opposite way and have lots of blooming to get bright. And as you can see in these scenes, I know it's a little hard because the store is bright, but I did get up and move around, get close to the screen, and in pretty much no circumstance was blooming or haloing a real issue. Black bars are very black, hardly ever raise, even with very bright objects going right up against those black bars. Shadow detail is excellent without any, like I said, major visible blooming issues. The motion is what you again expect from Sony, being top tier. Color gradients are fantastic, no visible posterization in scenes like this where there's many different gradients in the sky. Skin tones are very natural all around. Very little adjustment was needed for this display to really pull it in. The white balance was a little too warm out of the box, but that's easily correctable, and aside from that, it's really easy to get this where it should be. When it comes to uniformity, this is easily the cleanest LCD-based TV that I've seen. There is vignetting still in the corners where they're not quite as bright as the rest of the screen, but aside from that, uniformity was perfectly fine. Now, of course, no display is perfect, and again, this is an LCD, not an OLED, so if you do go trying really hard to look for blooming and haloing, you will find it, especially in a darker room. But as far as comparatively to other Sonys or even other brands, it really has that excellent balance in the way the local dimming works to maintain the brightness and vibrancy while not exhibiting too much haloing and blooming, and it gives you just a really, really good balance. Now, in the US, only the 85-inch is available, so this review applies to the 85-inch alone. All right, now we're going to take a look at some of the basic numbers. So in SDR, we're seeing a full screen of over 680 nits and a peak in SDR of about 1450. This is with window measurements. And then window measurements for HDR, we have a full screen of just over 700 and a peak of around 1650. Now when it comes to real scene peak highlights, in typical content, you're going to see somewhere between about 900 to 1200, and then with very high APL or average picture level, so very, very bright overall scenes that have highlights, those highlights are going to be right around 700 to 1000, give or take, maybe 1100. That would be the brightest of scenes. Also, the BT 2020 gamut coverage was the highest that I have measured on an LCD display at 82%. It's not quite QD OLED high, which gets to about 90%, but it's higher than the typical 70 to 75% you see on most others. Alright, so any further measurements and for a deeper dive, I will be doing a live stream discussing this and the Z9K, which I also did right next to it. So I will have links for that stream, and then you'll be able to get additional information if you want that. Now, I am going to go through all of the settings and show the recommended settings. The first thing you want to do is go in the base settings and go to energy saver and just make sure that the power savings is off. Sony does ask you if you want to have energy saving turned on during the initial setup, so most people will probably just click off there and you won't have to worry about that. Next, we're going to go up to channels and inputs, and then we're going to go to external inputs and set our HDMI ports. All right, port 3 and 4 are our 2.1 ports, with port 3 being the eARC. Now, most people are just going to set everything to enhanced, except with port 3, you have enhanced, which gives you 4K 120, or enhanced with Dolby Vision, which caps at 4K 60, and then you have VRR. So if you go to VRR, that will lock you into game mode. For now, we're going to put this in Dolby Vision mode, and then 4 we can set to VRR, and then I will show you in a bit how the game bar works with turning VRR on and off. Now you can back out of this menu and start going into the picture settings. So a lot of people like to use or will use cinema, but really custom is the best mode to use. In cinema, the contrast enhancer and live color are on by default. Now you can turn those off, which is fine, but then the cinema mode still has a difference in gamma. So I'll recommend you use custom, but if you want to use cinema, you can as well, or you can use one for day, one for night. Now once you're in, pick the mode that you want. I turn off the auto picture mode, but if you want to have it changing for like game and whatnot, then you can do that. Ambient light sensor will detect the light in the room and alter the picture, so I have that turned off. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't quite seem to get. With LCD-based TVs, the higher you set the brightness in SDR, the worse your black level will be. So you really want to set this to the point that it's bright enough for your room without going too bright, or you're going to sacrifice your black level. Now, in a brighter room, around 35 should be fine. Setting it to 8 or 10 should be fine for a dark room. Gamma of -2 is going to be 2.4, -1 is 2.3, 0 is 2. Black level should be fine at 50, and then auto local dimming is medium by default. That's going to be the more accurate and brightest option, but if you do set it too high, it can suppress any blooming even more. But with this TV, it's not that big a deal, so you can set it to whichever you like, but medium is what I would suggest. Peak luminance off is still very bright in SDR, but you can set it higher if your room is very bright with reflections. We're going to have it on Expert 1 color temperature and live color set to off. If you turn live color up, it will oversaturate the image. And then going to clarity, the default sharpness of 50 is correct. Reality creation on manual is default, but I like to set it to auto. When it comes to noise reduction, either off or auto is generally what I would tell people, but you can mess around with them with the type of source that you have, whether it's a cable box or a streaming box. Smooth gradation on low is fine. And then when it comes to motion, this is personal preference. Clearness is the black frame insertion. You can see as we go to max, it'll cut the brightness and cause flicker. But if you do set it to 1, you shouldn't have flicker or a loss in brightness. And then smoothness is the motion interpolation setting, and most will probably either want it on min 1 or possibly 2. Cine motion, you would want either on low or off for most content. On high, it can cause increased soap opera effect, especially if used with smoothness on 1. Now when it comes to the white balance on this, it was negative red 5 and negative green 5 on the gain settings. That got it to D65. Now these are probably going to be pretty consistent, so you can try that out and see how it looks. And then go over to the game picture mode. We'll do the game settings, which pretty much is about the same as what we just did. There's some less clarity settings or motion settings, but for the most part everything else is about the same. Now when you go into HDR, then the tone mapping will unlock and things like that, and it'll automatically put the brightness up to max, turn the peak luminance on high, and do all of that for you. And then if you do change anything with the motion or clarity, that's going to be tied the same between SDR and HDR when you're in that picture mode. And if this is going too fast for you, feel free to slow down the playback of the video speed or pause it as you need to. If I try to slow down the actual video, make the video too long, then no one will click on and watch the video. So in game mode with the motion, all you can really do is turn on the motion blur reduction, which is black frame insertion. Otherwise, there's nothing for motion in game mode. Now, since in HDR, it's automatically going to change the brightness settings for you, you don't need to mess with anything in HDR10. I'll demonstrate the difference in the tone mapping for you, but it's going to default to gradation preferred, which is what's strongly recommended, as that's what tracks EOTF correctly and is going to show the most detail. So with this in 10,000 nits, You can see there's a tree line in the back of the image, and then if we go down to the tone mapping settings and we turn it to brightness preferred, you're going to lose detail, and then if we go to off, it's also going to completely clip and you're going to lose all the detail. So just setting it into gradation preferred is the best option. Now when it comes to setting up the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5, you're going to set it to 1500 nits by counting your clicks up 18 clicks, and on the Xbox you pull both bumpers and triggers and you can set both screens and see the numbers. Sorry about the flickering on the display. That has to do with the camera, not the TV itself. But what I want to show here is that when you press the button to bring up the game bar and then you turn the VRR on, and then if you turn it back off, if you remember earlier we had set the HDMI port to Dolby Vision, but now when you turn the VRR off, instead of going back to what you had selected, it's going to set it to just enhanced without Dolby Vision. This is kind of defeats the whole purpose, in my opinion, of having that VRR setting on the game bar, because you're going to still have to go in and change that whenever you want to watch something in Dolby Vision. That is, if you are also playing on the same input and turn on the VRR. So this is why I would generally recommend using port 4 for playing if you can, and port 3 for watching, or if you don't need VRR on port 3, then you can just leave it in the Dolby mode, but then you also are capped at 60 Hz. So again, I think playing on HDMI 4 is the best option. Otherwise, you are going to have to be going into that menu and changing the HDMI port setting depending on what you're watching and if you were just playing with VRR or not. And just to be sure, I also tested this at 60 Hz and 120 Hz just to make sure that that was not part of what's going on, and it's not. It's just whenever you toggle off VRR, it's going to go back to enhanced, and that's it. Now, in general, when playing, you can leave it in VRR mode, because again, that's going to be 4K 120. Now the difference is that it is going to add a few milliseconds of input lag, but that's not really an issue for most games. Now if you are playing something that you know can hold a steady frame rate and is very sensitive to input delay, like, you know, say Street Fighter 6 or something, then you can turn off the VRR with the switch and then turn it back on if you flip over to a different game that you would rather have the VRR. So it is a little beneficial in that regard. And also, there's a fairly strong argument to just not use Dolby Vision on this display. It is quite bright enough that it doesn't benefit really from Dolby Vision too much. And so while Dolby Dark is technically the more accurate mode than bright, it does offset the white point, so it'll be warmer looking than all your other content and actually be too warm. So if you are going to use Dolby, I would say go ahead and just use Dolby Bright. And especially if you're in a bright room, then it'll be more visible. If you are in a dark room, you can set gradation preferred on with Dolby Bright to help pull it down and make it not quite as over brightened. And then the rest of the settings pretty much the same as we had done previously. So I would suggest setting it up with Dolby Bright and then try the same content in Dolby Bright and in just HDR10, and then pick which one you prefer. Decide if you want to have the Dolby turned on or off. Now, if you do have the display calibrated, then Expert 2 or a different color temp can be calibrated for Dolby Dark to offset the white point offset that's there. So as long as the calibrator knows about that and knows how to do it, they can fix that. So you could use the Dolby Dark mode with a calibration. And it's not that you can't without, it's just like I said, it's going to be even more warm than it's supposed to be. Now with gaming, I didn't get much time for gaming on it, but it's pretty much, you know, no complaints from me. It's the local dimming works basically the same in game mode as it does outside of game mode. 4K 120 VRR, everything works fine. The image quality is fantastic, and again, with the way the local dimming works, there's very little visible blooming or distractions or issues. And unlike the Sony OLED models, you're not going to have to worry about any dimming while you're playing because it's not an OLED. Now on the flip side, because it's not an OLED, you know, there is pixel response time, so there's very, very slight smearing, but that's just more to do with being used to OLED, which has near instant pixel response time. And then going back to an LCD, I can see it. It's one of those things, again, that if you really try to look for it and find it, you can see it. But if you're just sitting there playing a game, ghosting and smearing is really not an issue. So again, pretty much top marks for as far as an LCD goes with gaming, no complaints. And then really with the rest of the TV overall, like I've said from the beginning, this is my favorite top pick for an LCD, and at 85 inches, there's no OLED that can compete at that size. The 83-inch OLEDs all have their own problems and uniformity issues and don't perform at the highest level. So if you really need the size, this is the best option out there. The question really comes down to the value, and it is a top-tier Sony, so there is a higher price on this than most others. So it's really up to you to decide if you want to pay whatever the price premium is against an alternative option to have at least what I would consider to be the best 85-inch option currently available. Now, if you do want any extra more in-depth information on this and or the Z9K, I will have a link below, possibly at the end of the video as well, with a live stream where I'm going to be going into the measurements between the two of them. But overall, I can say that I think this is superior to the Z9K. And with that said, I thank you all for watching, and I hope to catch you again in the next one very soon.